impact on the island, the struggles of the people of Vieques, a response to the military presence, certainly has been the focus of most of my life and most of my academic or professional and personal life and work. It is important to say that before the Navy raised its ugly head in Vieques in the 1940s, Vieques had already 4,000 years of cultural development. And there are a series of other struggles that went on. The Taino, indigenous peoples of Vieques, like those in the rest of Puerto Rico. In Vieques, Casimar and Yaureibo, the two Taino chiefs, fought to the death with others against the Spanish military in 1514. We've got documentation from the chroniclers who accompanied the Spanish military forces. African slaves, hundreds of African slaves. We now have the names of somewhere around 375 African slaves who lived, worked, and died in Vieques between 1844 and 1873, the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico, and several accounts of slave uprisings, slave rebellions of different types. Slaves were imprisoned in the fort that is now a museum, and also other workers, a large number of free black English-speaking men and women from the islands of St. Thomas, St. Croix, St. Kitts, Nevis, Tortola, Villengordo, who came into Vieques in the 19th century, important part of the working population, and profound impact on the economy and the culture, also protagonized a series of struggles, of moments of resistance against the horrific conditions in the plantations. And then 1915, the large-scale sugar strike, or strike of sugarcane workers throughout all of Puerto Rico. But in Vieques, according to a 1916 congressional report on labor conditions in Puerto Rico, and according to expressions in that report by then U.S. Governor of Puerto Rico, Arthur Jagger, the events in Vieques were the most violent in the whole island-wide strike, or archipelago-wide strike, and proportionally more workers in Vieques participated than in any other part of Puerto Rico. So Vieques, we could say, even before the struggle against U.S. military, had a collective memory and a collective experience, a historic experience of struggle, probably not unlike most other peoples. But we are recording that or collecting information about that in our historic archives. It's available, people who are interested. I'm going to leave here at Casa Las Americas a copy of this document. This is something we're going to be presenting at Hunter College and some other places as part of our presentations in the next couple of days. And it's a DVD that we prepared this year as a project of our historic archives. There are 30,000 pages of documents here, including a few thousand pages from the 19th century church baptism and death records about African slaves, thousands of other pages from late 19th century and early 20th century municipal documents about economic activity and other issues. All of the Vieques newspapers, the Vieques Times, Página de Cheo, Isla Nena, among others, a large number, hundreds of documents from the Cruzada por Rescate de Vieques, which was the group in the 1970s, 78 to 80, 81, 82, that was the heart of the struggle then. A big collection of the documents, and many other things are on this DVD. So I'm going to leave this here at Casa Las Americas so that you can use it and share it, and people, particularly for students or other people interested in Vieques history. It's a neat tool. We're now looking to do another 30 or 40,000 pages over the next couple of years, and we're doing this with some help from the Puerto Rican Foundation for the Humanities, among other entities. So let me. I don't want. I can go on for hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to try to. I'm going to try to. It's 7:22, so I'll try not to go like much more than like 20 minutes or so, and so that we can have some time for questions and comments. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the historic struggle. What in the 70s, the more recent civil disobedience struggle. What's happening now? Relationships that may exist between the Vieques situation and the Occupy movements happening here and in other places in the world. But it is important to mention that the struggle against the U.S. military began immediately upon the arrival of the U.S. military. In Vieques, there were different forms of resistance. In Puerto Rico, some politicians, not many, people like Don Pedro Avisu Campos, was one of the few who dared to speak out against the military presence and denounced the U.S. government for practicing the vivisection of the Puerto Rican nation in Vieques through the expropriations, and a few others made some comments. But it was very difficult. Cold War, Second World War first, then in the Cold War, it was still very difficult for people to speak out in the 50s. A series of very repressive laws throughout Puerto Rico, sort of McCarthy-style laws imposed in Puerto Rico, and their own particularities. But there was different moments of resistance. In the 60s, even in the 1950s, the municipal government of Vieques, every municipal government of Vieques, from the beginning of the military presence until the very end, had to present and approve municipal resolutions condemning the military presence for different reasons. For violence by military personnel in the streets, violence against women, violence amongst themselves. There were race riots among military personnel that spilled over into the streets. The death of Mapepe Christian was an important moment. In the 1952-53 Korean War, large numbers of U.S. military people in Vieques, high levels of prostitution, alcoholism, and violence. The killing of Mapepe is sort of the most noticeable manifestation, and the one that we know more about because we have more documentation. A recent exhibition at our museum was titled Killing Mapepe, Death and Sex in the Cold War Vieques, a very powerful exhibit by Bonnie Donahue and Kate McCaffrey that we hope to bring to New York sometime in the near future. Mapepe Christian, a 70-year-old guy in the Barrio Destino, had a small bar frequented by military personnel, and one night, it's Semana Santa, was Holy Week, 1953, a bunch of drunken Marines entered, and as a scuffle began, Mapepe intervened. There was a prostitute working in the bar at the time, and he sort of intervened kind of to protect her and to try to stop these drunken guys from not banging down a door, and they beat him to death. He died. It was a death impune. Absolutely nobody ever punished for the death of Mapepe. There were some minor punishments to some of the military involved, but nobody seriously punished and no one accused of the murder of Mapepe. Only recently, in the last 2 years, that Bonnie Donahue out of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston found in a Navy archives in Suitland, Maryland, the 145-page military report on the death of Mapepe that had been shelved since 1953. And based upon that report, she was able to put together this really powerful exhibit. If people who want to know more about that, or people who have a venue they might like to present this exhibit, can let us know. Anyway, the municipal government of Vieques in 1952-53 had a series of resolutions condemning the military presence because of its violence, condemning the military control of the land and the economic impact on the local economy, asking the Navy to return the lands. In the 1960s, early 1960s, Viequense University students began to organize against the military, held some protests. In 1964, the mayor of Vieques, Antonio Rivera, traveled to Washington to protest a Navy plan to expropriate. In the 1940s, the U.S. Navy took over 2/3 of Vieques, 8,000 acres on the western end, 15,000 acres on the eastern end, pushing thousands of people who had lived on both ends into the middle like the ham of a sandwich, and using the western end for storage of munitions and the eastern end for maneuvers and bombing practice. In 1964, there was a plan to expropriate the entire south coast to be able to unify or have a joining corridor between the east and western military property. The mayor and others created in Vieques at that time the first committee to rescue or to defend Vieques, Comité en Defensa de Vieques. The mayor traveled to Washington, met with military officials, and blocked that project. It's let me go back and mention in 1961 also the Dracula plan that you may have heard about. This was letters, when we have copies of these letters in the archives, from the White House signed by John F. Kennedy and from Fortaleza signed by Muñoz Marin about the Navy plan for the abolition of the municipality of Vieques. The Navy was going to take everybody out, including the dead from the cemetery. And so Kennedy was asking the governor his opinion about this, and the governor said, well, you know, it's not a really good idea, and people are going to have to vote about it, but I'll do everything I can if you guys really believe that this is necessary. Obviously that didn't go into effect, but it is now the topic of a book called The Plan Dracula, or Dracula because of the dead and the graves and vampires. Evelyn Vélez, who's now the president of the Puerto Rican Association of Historians, that was her graduate thesis, actually, a doctoral thesis. Very good book, Plan Dracula. So there was, a series of moments of struggle, or at least moments of protest, in the, for decades while the Navy was there. But it wasn't until the 70s that fishermen began to organize. You can leave it on. Oh, that's good. That's good. Fishermen began to respond to the increased bombing on Vieques that resulted from the Navy's closure of its Culebra facilities. The Navy was forced to get out of Culebra in the early 70s because of other civil disobedience and the struggle of the people of Culebra with people from the independence movement of Puerto Rico. And so this was 72, I believe 72, 73, 1975, I think Nixon signed the order, 74 maybe. And so in the mid to late 70s, a marked increase in bombing. Fishermen in Vieques are, the closest witnesses, to the increased bombing, more destructions of fish traps, more blocking or limiting the access into fishing areas. Fishermen begin to do some maneuvers and block Navy ships and get support from, again, mainly from the independence movement of Puerto Rico, some clergy as well. Important moment of struggle. And in this period, in May of 1979, the arrest of 21 people includes the arrest of Ángel Rodríguez Cristobal from Ciales, who come to Vieques in support of the people of the fishermen and others, arrested in May of 79, sent to Tallahassee Federal Prison for a 6-month sentence, and he was beaten to death in his jail cell on 11 November 1979. There's a bust of Ángel in the beach at Esperanza every year. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were in front of that bust on 11 November to remember and think about Ángel and his sacrifice for peace on Vieques. So there were many moments of struggle, but it wasn't until, as was mentioned, the death of David Sanes, April 19, 1999. This death during a Navy incident where an F-18 fighter jet pilot dropped 2 500-pound live bombs on the Navy's own observation post, killing David Sanes, a Viequense civilian security guard working for the Navy, working for a private company hired by the Navy. He was killed immediately in that incident, and that death shook the consciousness of the people of Vieques and the people of Puerto Rico like no other event had ever done. It was a catalytic event that coalesced a unity that Puerto Rico had never seen before. Prior to this, in the 1990s, the organized movement of the late 70s and early 80s died down for different reasons, fell apart. And so throughout the 80s, there was some ad hoc, sort of intermittent protests. In the early 90s, some of the people from that earlier moment of protest, like Ismael Guadalupe, Lidiana Cruz Emerick, Lula Tirado, among others, and some other people who came into the struggle from different perspectives, created the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques. By 1999, the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques had 6-7 years of organized effort, creating, consciousness raising in the communities and the barrios around the issues of military contamination and health, environmental injustice, environmental racism, etc. We had also created a large network of support groups in Vieques, in Puerto Rico, and internationally, so that when the moment came of the death of David Sanes, we were in a relatively positive position to be able to take advantage of the organized activity of the years previous to direct and channel and organize and mobilize on this the rage and indignation that was the result of David's death. Also, at that moment, almost quickly after the death of David Sanes, a series of other groups sprung up. The Vieques Women's Alliance, Vieques Youth Group, a group of students, university students and high school students. The Popular Democratic Party of Vieques became very involved. The Independence Party throughout all of Puerto Rico, and the small Independence Party of Vieques became involved. The church groups, the bishops of every church in Puerto Rico created the Ecumenical Council for Peace in Vieques, union groups and others. But in Vieques, a series of groups, and also some nuclei of people around some important activists like Carlos Zenon and his family, Lady and Casimaya, Aurego, Pedro, who created the Monte David camp, occupying the Navy's bombing range, and one of the first of a series of almost 15 encampments that run the eastern end of Vieques and occupied, to use a current term, occupied the Navy's bombing range for a year between 21 April and 1999 to 4 May 2000, when the Navy arrested everybody and then began to bomb again. But for that year, we did occupy, in a big way, the U.S. Navy's bombing range and stop the bombing. But there were, again, a multiplicity of entities in Vieques, as I mentioned. The Monte David group, there was a group around the Cayo Yayi, directed principally by Hector Olivieri Iti, fishermen, the Fishermen's Association and others, the Ventura family, Ismael Guadalupe, who was part of our committee for the rescue and development of Vieques, one of the historic leaders of the struggle, also a protagonist, and many others. Leaders of the political parties and the churches in Vieques also became very active in the struggle. And I think we all know, I don't want to go into too much more detail about the struggle. This was, I do want to say the following. This small community of Vieques, with the support of the Puerto Rican nation in the archipelago and in the diaspora, without firing a single shot, defeated the most powerful military force in the history of humanity. I'll say that one more time because it's so neat. That the people of Vieques, the people of Puerto Rico, the nation of Puerto Rico, in the archipelago and in the diaspora, with support from other people who were working for peace from different perspectives, environmental or health issues or human rights issues, spiritual issues. But again, this force of people, principally the Puerto Rican nation, without firing a single shot, defeated the most powerful military force in history. So this was not a small thing that happened. This was a very important victory, a very big victory. And despite serious problems right now in Vieques, like in all of Puerto Rico, like in New York, despite a serious crisis that we live in Vieques, we, I would suggest, live much better without the Navy than we did with the Navy. I personally feel very happy to know that we blocked or created an obstacle, no matter how small, but we created some obstacle to this diabolical military apparatus that is the U.S. Armed Forces, used to defend the interests of the most powerful corporations in the world, who direct things in Congress and the White House. That we were able to block and create an obstacle to some of that, I think, is a wonderful thing, not just for Vieques, but for the world. So it was a great victory from many different perspectives, and it was a really powerful experience, but we have not learned the lessons of Vieques. And this is something I taught. Last night I met with 15 young people, mostly young people, in Hato Rey, in Puerto Rico, before I left this morning, at the Occupy Puerto Rico camp in a park in Hato Rey, in the business sector of San Juan, and talked about the need for the analysis of different moments of historic struggle, particularly important struggles. We did not do the analysis was not done from the 78 to 1980 period, when great accomplishments happened, when very important things happened, when there were powerful things that happened, positive and negative. And now we just finished, actually it wasn't just, but a few years ago, between 1999 and 2003, there was a very special moment in human history, a very special moment in Puerto Rican history, a very special moment for Vieques, and we have not taken the time, I think because, I don't know, maybe as human beings we're just so immature, in a sense, and we just don't have the capacity to sit down with each other and think and say out loud in a frank and honest way that this was really great what we did, and this was really bad that I did, or this was really bad that you did, and I think maybe we should think about this. We don't have that maturity. Criticism, self-criticism, I think comes out of the Maoist tradition maybe, or probably out of many traditions, but it's not done. It's something so basic. It just means learning. I mean, it's a question of learning. This analysis is so fundamental and so missing that we have failed, I would suggest, and I include myself, we have failed to take advantage of some really important lessons. We have failed to take the energy from a really great moment and try to redirect it to now, making the changes needed. But we have not done that. And that's, I would say that's urgent. This is kind of the message last night I gave for these young people, that to even analyze every day they're working, on the current issue themselves, and the Occupy Puerto Rico issue, and whatever other issues. The analysis is important. So, let me just make a few comments about what's happening now in Vieques. May 1st, 2003, the Navy's out. The U.S. Congress approves the 2004 Military Appropriations Act, and in that act is the Spence Act, or in that law, in that budget, is the Spence Act. And that's a specific piece of congressional legislation that says, among other things, May 1st, 2003, the Navy's out. The land that the Navy controlled in Vieques is now to be administered by the Interior Department and the Interior Department's Fish and Wildlife Service. The bombing range, the most destroyed place, the most contaminated area, the live impact area, is to be called a wilderness preserve, which by definition means a pristine place untouched by man. That's the definition in the book. Obviously not true, but they use that phraseology so that nobody can go in there. And the rest of it is this wilderness refuge with very restricted human activity, which means if not a lot of people can go in, there'll be less a low level of possible danger to possible risk to human health, so the cleanup may be less as well. This is something the Navy and the military and the Defense Department and the Energy Department of the United States has done historically. Use the Fish and Wildlife Division to create these wildlife refuges in places that have been contaminated so that they can get out of their responsibilities of the cleanup and restrict entrance and restrict liabilities, basically. May 1st, 2003, the bombing stops, big celebrations, and between then and now, again, a series of, between then and now, life has gone on. We have these every day, a 24-hour period, and the sun comes up and the moon comes up, and things happen, but we have not been giving serious thought to analyze what happened between 99 and 2003. What did we do well? What did we not do? And what should we be doing now in these times between 2003 and now? There's not been that focus of trying to use the lessons and trying to use those lessons. Let me say that during the protest, we also created a proposal. And then we had the slogan, la protesta con la propuesta, right? So a very important element of the struggle. That this wasn't just a protest because we didn't like the Navy, but it was a protest with a proposal, una propuesta. And the proposal was, we have a better idea for using Vieques. Instead of a bombing range, it should be a place for good stuff, where people can live and grow things and work and create a healthy, sustainable economy. And during that period of 99-2003, together with dozens of Puerto Rico's most important and highly recognized experts in social and economic development from universities and private practice, we created the Technical and Professional Group in Support of Sustainable Development of Vieques. Published in February, March 2004, the Guidelines for Sustainable Development. that became the basis for what is now the law governing economic development of Vieques, the Master Plan for Sustainable Development, part of Law 153, which governs development on Vieques. Ignored, put it in a shelf, and nobody pays any attention to it. Because what happens in terms of development, we're talking again, what happens in terms of money, and who's going to make money and get power, that's determined by the politicians who, and the powerful people who support them and for whom they work, and they're not interested in sustainable development. They're interested in sustaining their power and sustaining their bank accounts and making them bigger. During this period, 2003 to the present, again, a series of changes in the dynamics of Vieques happen. And this, you know, I mean, on the one hand, I guess it's easy to say, well, look, there are ups and downs in social movements. And so 99, 2003, we had this really great crescendo, right, culminating in the, you know, in the great victory, 2003, Navy's out. And then, you know, people got tired, and so we went down a bit, but we're still going down, and we're not really going anywhere in any other direction right now. And so there's been a demobilization. The organizations, the community organizations, like the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques and the Vieques Women's Alliance, are now just skeleton groups. And I say this as a self-criticism. I mean, I'm one of the founding members of the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques. We're sort of skeleton groups, and we do some, you know, some put out information kind of stuff, and we're working on a couple of specific projects, but they are not dynamic, vibrant, community mobilizing entities doing a consistent project of consciousness raising and organizing and agitation and action around the pressing issues in the post-bombing period: decontamination, return of the lands, and economic development, and the health issues. Those issues are not being worked on in Vieques. It makes me sad to say that, and let me take it back then, because it makes me sad. I don't want to be sad. Those issues are not being worked on with the intensity that we all know they should be worked on, because they're life and death issues. Why that's happening, again, is the topic of an analysis that has not been done, that we just refuse to do. And I don't want to. I have some ideas about why, but I'm not 100% sure. But there are some good things happening. Now, let me also say, and this is my sort of analysis, the Navy leaves in 2003, and during that process of the struggle, the community organizations, we had a very impressive power of convocatoria, you know, to call people out, to mobilize people. We had a very powerful, there was a lot of power in the community. And the politicians came to us. Some came to us because they were concerned genuinely. Some politicians like Jose Rivera was not like a normal politician. We all know that. He's not the normal case. He's something very particular. But the politicians from all the ideological persuasions had to come to us and participate. And the governmental agencies also sent their people to come and meet with the different organizations. And there was a real sense of community power in that process. 2003 to now, and I'm not sure, at what moment, if it was, on May 2nd, 2003, or if it was in May 15th, or maybe it was in June or July. I don't think anybody really planned it in Fortaleza or the White House or in the Pentagon. People might have been talking about it. They might have planned it. I don't know. But something happened that made a very significant change. All of a sudden, the politicians in Vieques, in Puerto Rico, and in the U.S., the government agencies, local and national and in the U.S., took back control over all the issues. All the issues. The health issue, the contamination issue, the development issue, the land issue. We also lost a really important opportunity. Our mayor, and I want to say this in the nicest possible way, and I'm so glad I got this call, so maybe I won't say it at all. Dame una llamada más tarde porque estoy en medio de una conversación. Gracias.
Contesta la llamada para cambiar el tape.
Ya lo mandé para el carajo. Yeah, no, I'm great. We don't want tape. Then it's going to keep getting in less trouble. I want to say this about our mayor during the period of the struggle. Damaso Serrano, Popular Democratic Party, played a key role in the struggle. Spent 4 months in prison, was constantly with us at all moments of the struggle. Did important stuff. I can remember for that year we had control of the bombing range. We also controlled the Navy's entrance, the Navy's gate. Right, we didn't let the Navy go in or out their own gate for a year, and we kept that control by having people 24/7 in front of that gate to warn, in case the Navy tried to go in or out. We had this telephone system, and within minutes we could mobilize 50 to 300 people, and we did it on several occasions when it was necessary. And I can remember, like at between 12 midnight and 4 in the morning, we had these shifts of people who had to be at the gate. And so we had Rabin Tirado, who was the ex-mayor for the PNP, right, the right-wing pro-statehood party. We had Dr. ¿Cómo se llamaba la doctora? Albandos. Dr. Albandos. She was the Independence Party candidate for mayor in 2000. She was from the PEEP. She was there at that period. And then Damaso. So we had from the three political parties, working with us at the Peace and Justice camp, blocking the gate from midnight to 4 in the morning on many, many, many occasions during that period. But anyway, what I want to say is that Damaso made very important contributions to the struggle. But something happened along the line in his second term, I believe, where he got caught up, I think, in some really bad stuff under the influence of a speculator, engineer, who kind of took control of his government. I mean, he let him take control of his government. And this guy basically, I think, sold Damaso to the devil. I'm not sure. I think that's what happened. We missed an opportunity. Damaso, as mayor, had the opportunity to have for free, a team of experts from Puerto Rico. This whole team of planners, architects, engineers, lawyers, environmental scientists, archaeologists, from the universities of Puerto Rico, private practice, who had been working in this struggle. They wanted to work for free as a free advisory group to the municipal government to help push a unique model of genuinely sustainable development for Vieques, based upon a process of conversation and constant dialogue in Vieques with people from Vieques about what people would like to see, this alternative. And they worked with us and looked for models and looked at the existing law and existing infrastructure, models of economic development in other places similar to Vieques that might have things we could use or borrow. And he threw that opportunity away. And I'm not 100% sure why. And I don't want to speculate about why, but we lost that opportunity. And Damaso lost the following elections, I think, because people saw that happen, because they saw that he's basically handed the government over to this speculator and engineer guy who was making a lot of money out of Vieques. And then we ended up with this other woman who's now the mayor from the PNP party, Evelyn. She's she's a sweetheart. She's a nice person, young person. I don't think she really has any vision, like any big vision for Vieques government. I have a feeling that she's also very easily manipulated by powerful people within her party. Things have not changed. It's a crisis. She's made some good statements about the contamination issue, about health issues on the ferry system. I don't want to be unfair to her, but there's no sense of urgency to try to, again, take that, go back and look at this struggle, go back and look at all of these possible resources, because, I believe she works from a perspective of the traditional view of development of Vieques that basically reigns within the political parties of Puerto Rico. That the people who should run the things in Vieques are people that look like me and not like Jasmine or Carlos. They should be Americans because we know better. Give them all the money, or they should be whoever else, but not the poor people of Vieques. There is no commitment to really allowing the people of Vieques to control their destiny. And we had a really wonderful opportunity, and I'm hoping that opportunity will come back. I mean, I think history is cyclical, right? And so hopefully it'll come back. I'm just not sure when. If I'm going to be around or not. But anyway, there's some interesting things happening now. I'm going to end with this, with a couple examples of good things that are going on. One of the projects, I think Frank mentioned these Ds, but he didn't go into detail. We didn't complete the 4 Ds. Again, the Ds were, and these were the basic demands of the struggle as we articulated them through the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques: demilitarization, decontamination, devolution or return of the lands, and development. And by development, we had this clear idea of sustainable development, community-based and community-controlled sustainable development. The Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques, Nilda Medina, one of the other founding board members of the committee, she took the issue of the development stuff very seriously, created about 2 years ago what is known as the Vieques Micro Business Incubator. And the idea is to push, to help people in Vieques try to take over some of the niches still left, the niches, is that what nichos? Is such a word in English? You know, those spaces in the economy that still might be available, you know, because 90% of the tourist economy of Vieques is controlled by Americans. The real estate, if there are 10 realtors in Vieques, 9.5 are Americans. And when I say Americans, I mean white U.S. people, like me. So some of those niches, you know, that are still around, and some of the service areas. So she's brought in over $250,000 from with ADA funds, some of the Obama money, and this is funneled through some of the organizations in Puerto Rico who know about Nilda, know her trajectory and her, you know, Nilda's a very powerful and important and good activist in Vieques who's been at this for 30 years now. And so they, because they trust her work, have used her project to sort of funnel some of these funds. And so, again, over $200,000 has now come in to about a couple dozen people in Vieques who've got these small micro businesses. You know, there's a little school supply store, and some guy who's got a computer doctor. He calls a little office. He's got a computer doctor. Other guys with air conditioning service, and some, you know, food vendors, etc. And she's got, you know, with the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, they've set up this sort of technical office within this building that she's using, and she, you know, finds the money wherever she can. But you know, they brought in new computers over the past couple of months, and they do workshops for micro business people and others in the community, you know, computer skills related to small business, that kind of stuff. So it's sort of accompanying, helping, mobilizing, pushing for micro businesses in Vieques. Another project we have is this radio project. The Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques got a license, a permit, what's known as a construction permit, a CP, to operate FM frequency 90.1. It's a full-power, non-profit educational radio frequency that would cover the Vieques, Culebra, Vieques, and parts of Puerto Rico like Ceiba and Aguabo, where the Roosevelt Roads base used to be. So over the past 2 years, we've been working on this issue to try to set up this radio station and make it a regional project for the communities that were most affected by the military presence. We're now looking, and we're going to do there'll be the second Radio Vieques dialogue at the University of Puerto Rico Humacao campus in January. To focus on cyber radio, you know, internet radio, because this FM thing is getting to be so much money that you need to set up an FM station. And the federal government cut out, the Obama administration has cut out more money than any other of the Republican or Democratic administrations for community radio than ever. President Obama eliminated over $20 million that had been used over the past several years for community radio stations to get started. So the money that we hoped would come in for us to be able to set up antenna and set up our main studio is disappeared. So we're kind of in a crisis. So we're now looking at internet radio as an alternative, possibly as a substitute or a complement. But so we have that upcoming project, and we also have this other project, which is the Museum for Vieques Historic Memory. And this is an academic project, but also a project basically to have Vieques students and university students and other academics from Vieques, from Puerto Rico, from elsewhere, to come and know about the Vieques struggle, to help us maybe do some of this analysis, and also to do some historical stuff, and also to look at many other Vieques topics, but also to provide the space and sort of the academic or intellectual infrastructure for the analysis necessary to push for sustainable development on Vieques. So those are some of the projects our committee's been working on recently. And there's also a really neat kind of ray of hope that I'm seeing recently. A group of young Vieques university students have begun to create an organization of Vieques university students with representatives in different campuses throughout Puerto Rico to work on some of the primary issues. And they kind of were spurred on to work on the almost total collapse of the maritime transportation system over this past year. So we're hoping we're offering to do workshops for them or work with them so that some of us who have been involved in in the community organizing and mobilizing stuff, Ismael, Nilde, Joe, and many others, can maybe meet with them and offer sort of workshops and create a small maybe institute for social activism. But there is this group of young people there, and it is a positive note for us. So I could go on forever. Let me also say that Jasmine Hernandez is here. Raise your hand, Jasmine. Jasmine Hernandez is a really important artist for us. Her project called Vieque Valiente, a project of his dozens of, how many portraits are there in that? 30 or so?
Like 29.
29, almost 30. Portraits of people from Vieques who were civil disobedience. I mean, incredible portraits with calligraphic included in the portrait that are done on camouflage fabric, right, to take back this idea that those who are the real strugglers, defending Vieques or the people of Vieques. And she's got in calligraphy segments of interviews she did with each of the civil disobedience, and then a series of very special people that she called the Semi series that include people like Carmelo Felix Mata, who died, an important person in the struggle, Millie V. Adams, the child symbol who died of brain cancer.
The relationship to the mayor and maybe some of the other perhaps elected officials in Vieques, and that almost fantasy, because I think for most, barring except for Jose Rivera, most elected officials become absorbed into the system at some point. And so I'm curious about that relationship with the mayor, and as things changed, were people kind of deluded into believing that the mayor now can lead the struggle, or he can make significant changes? And so I'm curious about that, the level of independence from the government officials, particularly the mayor.
It's I had this expression that I use a lot. I used a lot then, and I continue to use it. That we cannot trust the politicians because history doesn't allow that. And you only have to just look back, not very far back, and look around. Like, on the other hand, I think we were very hopeful with Damaso in particular, because he spent 4 months in prison. He spoke out in a very, he was genuinely part of the struggle. I have no doubt at all. I mean, I'm not anyone to judge his commitment to the struggle of his own people and his own place. I have no doubt about that. But I think you're right. We made a mistake by leaving that, the important issue of economic development in the hands of the municipal government. There were those in the Vieques struggle, key leaders, or people who at least, I would say, sort of manipulated in some way some of the leadership. And I don't want to say any names, so this is kind of more just a chisme, I guess, if I'm not going to really say the names. I feel like but there were some in the leadership who said that at one point the only spokesman for the struggle now should be Damaso. Nobody else should, and so, for instance, the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques shouldn't put out press releases on X subject. This should go out by the mayor. The mayor should be there should be one spokesperson. I'm not 100% sure why that happened, but it was a reality. I mean, I can remember being at a meeting and hearing that, and I'm taken aback by it. But yeah, I think we were in, you know, I don't know if it's pendejo, but I would be ingenuous, you know, naive or whatever.
Or tired.
But yeah,
People get tired.
people also got tired. I mean, there were many things happening at the same time. I mean, there's several things happening at the same time. You know, I mean, Damaso. See, this is a chronology. This is where the analysis really needs to happen. Sort of look at that timeline and see, you know, when it is that we see this this sort of really dark person, and I don't know if this or this sort of light person, to use a different expression, really bad person who, you know, shadowy, or no, this very sunny person comes in, you know, and really takes over the stuff in the municipal government, and we're all watching this happen. And I went. The guy's name is Marcano. This is the engineer who sort of got in there and took over Damaso's municipal government. We were concerned about this guy because people. Who is this person? We started to hear some rumors, and I personally, you know, I called Pedro Muniz. Because Pedro Muniz is part of todo Puerto Rico con Vieques on the mainland of Puerto Rico, and they knew more. They were more worldly than we, you know, in Vieques about who some of these players are in the political parties and the economics of the political parties in Puerto Rico. And so we called Pedro Muniz and asked him if he could, you know, investigate a bit for us. He suggested we talk to Bendito Jose, el alcalde de Carolina. Jose Aponte, que en paz descanse. Jose Aponte was like Jose Rivera, a very different kind of politician. He was genuinely concerned about Vieques. And he poured his own time and energy, made great sacrifices. He invested enormous amounts of resources from the municipality of Carolina, you know, one of Puerto Rico's most important cities, in Vieques during the struggle and just for other things like to help clean up the town. I mean, he was really dedicated to the Vieques struggle. And Pedro Muniz suggested that we go and talk to Jose, because Jose Aponte was kind of the guru of the Popular Democratic Party mayors at the time. Am I right, Jose? ¿Verdad? He was like one of the leading people in the party. And he was very close to what was happening in Vieques. And Pedro Muniz found out that this guy Marcano, who was this shady character in Vieques, who had gotten really too close to Damaso, had been also involved with Jose Aponte. Jose Aponte knew about him. So I went one day. Pedro was supposed to go. Pedro Muniz, he couldn't show up. So I went, and I can remember, you know, going into Jose Aponte's office. It was really splendid, big office in Carolina. He's a chain smoker, right? So I sat and talked with him for probably 15 minutes or so. He must have smoked 15 cigarettes. I don't know. It's like constantly, but a sweetheart of a guy, right? And very honest. And you know, and I said, well, Jose, you know why I'm here. I mean, because Pedro Muniz had said something to him, and I was a little uncomfortable. You know, one, because I was alone and there was no one else around. And I wished, you know, it's not good to do these kinds of things alone, but you know, I was, and it was a responsibility because I needed to go report to people back about what, you know, what Jose could tell us about who this guy was. And you know, I said, look, Jose, I know it's not a nice thing to come and ask you to talk about another person who's not here, but you know that this is a life and death issue, so you know, what can you tell us? And he said very openly, look, this guy Marcano is from Carolina. I had him in my municipal government for a while. I had to throw him out because he was putting his hand where it shouldn't be. And then he says to me, I told Damaso, this is Jose Aponte, que en paz descanse. I wish he was, you know, maybe he will send down a bolt of lightning that will say, it's true, Bob, what you're saying. You know, he said to me, I told Damaso, this is Jose Aponte, I told Damaso that when I saw Marcano with him in his municipality, I said, be careful. This is Jose Aponte, the most important Popular Democratic Party mayor in Puerto Rico, telling Damaso to be careful. And then Jose Aponte says to me in the conversation, the next time I went to Vieques and I still saw Marcano involved in the municipal government, I told Damaso again that he needed to, you know, be very careful with Marcano because I didn't want to have, because this is the Jose Aponte saying, I don't want to be around where this guy is. When Aponte, this is Aponte says to me, when I saw that Damaso wasn't listening to me and that Marcano continued, I had to abandon all of my work for Vieques. So Aponte knew what was happening, that this was some sleazy guy who was going to get Damaso in trouble, and he did. But not only that, I mean, of course I care that these people are stealing and robbing the money that belongs to the people of Vieques in Puerto Rico. I mean, it's obviously not good. But more than that is that in that process, as I said before, we lost a really wonderful opportunity for Damaso as the mayor and leader of the community to accept and embrace this group of, would have been the greatest advisory team in the history of Puerto Rico for any municipality. It was going to work because out of solidarity, these people who were out of solidarity wanted to work with the municipality of Vieques. And my guess is Damaso said no. Damaso basically, I've used this expression on several occasions. It isn't very nice, but I kind of say that Damaso spat in their faces. Damaso spat in their faces. I mean, ignored them, didn't pay any attention. And my guess is because, Marcano said or knew that if these people got involved, they weren't going to be able to steal. They weren't going to be able to rob. Period. I mean, it's not mysterious. It's not really all that mysterious. And we know what politics and money is all about. And it's a kind of almost the same thing. Most politicians, once they're elected, not all, but too many, are in there because their political power means money power for them and their families and their friends.
That this has been an ongoing thing, and I know that struggles can be very, I think he hit the nail on the head. People maybe got tired, but I feel like the time is really right now, and this is precisely why I'm here, because I want to get involved. Good. And I know that things have come to somewhat of a halt, but I think that we can still get things going in Vieques. And I just have a few questions. I mean, I know that there's a team of people. Those people probably still exist, but I'm curious about the Sustainable Development of Vieques' law that went into Law 153. Mm-hmm. Now, does that have money attached to it, or is it just a mandate?
Neither.
None. Okay. Okay.
It's just paper.
Okay. And then another question, because I know
the document is here. I can give you. I can send you by email. Right. The master plan. It's like it's a very big, good-sized document, but it's part of this 30,000 pages that we're going to leave here, but I can send it to you as a separate file, I don't know, 5 or 6 megabytes, maybe 10 or 20. You might have it already.
I can, yeah, I'd love to. My whole thing is that I feel like things still have to happen there, and this is, like I said, this is precisely why I'm here, and just really finding a way to get this land back and clean it up and really find development, because if you go into the center of Vieques, it is just so depleted. Like the youth are hanging out, and it's a really, it's not to make it all negative, but
Vieques has the highest rate of teen pregnancy, the highest rate of teens on drugs and alcohol in all of Puerto Rico.
And those are the things when I go there that are very disturbing when you go into the center of town. If you go by Esperanza, you're fine, but if you're in the center of town, and so my whole thing is to really get involved. I have a lot of resources available to me as well that I want to start putting into Vieques, even eventually, being there's, so I just want to find a way to get involved.
I would call Nilda. I'll give you my card and I'll write Nilda's number. She directs the Vieques Micro Business Incubator. Call Sonia and ask Sonia about Nilda, and she's going to tell you, the wonderfulness about this. And that might be a place to start. Know that then there are a few initiatives. Last year, a group of people began to meet around the health issue, but it's not really gotten off the ground. So there've been some intermittent meetings about the need to do community health stuff and not depend on the health department of Puerto Rico. Doesn't care jack shit about the people of Vieques, and they will not provide the health facilities that people need. The federal government denies any responsibility and will not do anything. There is right now Congressman Rothman from New Jersey, who is pushing a bill for
you know, to get the federal government to set up on Vieques a high, you know, high standard, high level medical facility. You know, but he's a Democrat. The Democrats don't really have any power, and Obama made lots of promises, but you know, I think Obama's middle name is Bush, and you know, it's a horrific thing to say, but it's what we're at least what we're feeling in the Clinton. I don't think he's going to Clinton, but I would suggest, you know, talk to Sonia. I mean, she can tell you about the microbusiness project, and that might be a place to start, at least to converse with Nilda. Yeah. I think that might be a good thing for you to do as well. You know, about possible projects. And come to Vieques. There's going to be a meeting.
I'm there in December. I'm going for Christmas.
What?
I'll be there for Christmas.
For Christmas? If you're there on the 10th of December, you're going to the 10th? Yeah. I think sometime in February we have a group of Pacific women coming to Vieques to have a dialogue also with some women and other people in Vieques about sort of sharing. I mean, there's been a lot of sharing of information between people from Vieques, women and others, with women in the Philippines, Okinawa, the Marshall Islands, Guam.
It's really the whole decontamination thing is really, really bothering me. I mean, a lot. And what you described about them sort of saying, "Oh, this is the worst land, and this is the next worst land," and then, as if, I mean, anybody who knows something about ecology knows that dry soil becomes dust and it blows places, and seeds blow in the wind, and you know, there's aquifers, that underground water supplies that go from one place to another, and you know, little wormies crawl and they don't stop at the borderline, you know, so you can't separate one place from another like that and think that you can wall off the contamination, because you can't. And it also, I mean, it's great to be starting these micro businesses, but if fishermen can't fish because the waters haven't been cleaned up, and people can't have a garden and have you know, a couple chickens and they're scratching in the yard or whatever, right? And have that food be safe to eat, then you know, I mean, then there's trouble, and people are going to get sick, and it's not just a matter of having a top-notch healthcare facility where people's cancer can be treated and people's cardiomyopathies can be treated and all that kind of stuff, and birth defects can be treated. It's sort of like, first of all, it's having people who know environmental medicine who can actually diagnose stuff and its relationship to the environment, and but also stopping the cancer before it starts. And I mean, you know, there's and it seems to me like, you know, I'd really like to understand better what you think some of us here who have, I mean, I have extensive networks in the environmental health movement, for example, and what some of us can do to support you in that, right? And I mean, there is a big thing going on in the 48, in the 50 states, in the 50 states right now about chemical reform, right? There's this bill called the the Toxic Substances Act, which hadn't been updated for like 30 years or something like that, that people now nationally are working on. And a lot of some military toxics people here who live in, you know, communities that were contaminated by bases here are, you know, part of that part of that coalition, and it would seem to me like that could be a place, and there's some really knowledgeable scientists and physicians as well as activists that are in that, and I mean, it seems like it might be a useful hookup for you as a support if there's something coming, if there's a desired, if something starts there, right?
Well,
there's things that can be built here, I think, to give you some support, and I think there are people here who'd be willing to do that.
Do you have any names?
I think we're clear that there are people throughout the world,
Right.
and much closer. Puerto Rico has enormous human resources,
Right.
medical and scientific and technical people, and we have over the past years, for many years, had networks of, we worked as part of the Military Toxics Project, so worked with people, the Kelly Air Base in San Antonio, the people of the Mass Military Reserve, people in Arizona and New Mexico dealing with, bombing there, people in Hawaii, and so we have those contacts, and but certainly we could use more, and we could use them updated.
Right.
The problem is there is not right now, and I don't want to be, again, totally negative, but we do not have right now in Vieques any organized, systematic, consistent nuclei of people working on the contamination issue. Absolutely none. There are many people concerned, probably the whole community, but there is not an ongoing, consistent, organized movement right now that has that process running. But I think what you're saying is that, the interrelationship between ecology, health, and economy, I mean, it's all, we're clear about this. And we've looked at all of these issues from a very holistic perspective for years now. So we're very clear about the need to, and we are, I think people in Vieques are really grateful. I know many of us, who've been involved in the struggle for decades, are extremely grateful for people who have been involved before, and after 2003 have gone on to work on other issues, because Vieques isn't the only issue in the world. I want to make this really clear, because people after 2003, a lot of people understood that we have now been involved in the Vieques issue for 4 years. We were there was this great victory, but I'm also interested in my community here that has this other problem, so now I'm going to focus here. Or that I have this, syndical union issue I need to work on, or that I now have my own personal academic project, or whatever. So I think, at least from my perspective, we need to be incredibly thankful to all those people who were in Vieques, with Vieques, working on Vieques, concerned about Vieques, who did whatever sacrifice for Vieques, for however many days, weeks, months, or years. Whether they're working on Vieques or thinking about Vieques a lot now or not, doesn't change that reality of that wonderful contribution that was done. We're just in a different moment now, and it's a difficult moment. And it's great to hear that there's still interest, and I think what if Frank and Ben continue to work on this issue. I know that there are people, Jose and William are people here, and Jasmine, who've been, involved in the Vieques issue from different perspectives, and something coalesces, and it happens to click with something happening in Vieques. Because again, if there is not in Vieques a nuclei of people working on the issue, it's really hard to attract and then direct in a correct way whatever well-meaning solidarity projects that might want to come. So I mentioned the microbusiness incubator project because it's something that's functioning right now. That's an area that's functioning. The health issue, there are a few people, Carmen Valencia, Mirna Pagan, Saidi Torres, who have been intermittently, not in any consistent way, but certainly involved and interested in that issue. And there were several meetings in this past year, maybe 5 or 6, to sort of look at the possibility of creating a community health project. But it's really difficult to keep things moving and mobilized.
And we spoke about the las lanchas, the ferries, that issue, which seems to be like a sabotage. And then the other issue of the proposals to develop a bridge, which again, I don't know if you could just speak to the status of those different things.
Go back if I can to just briefly about the cleanup process, the decontamination thing. The Navy has to clean up Vieques because it's the law, right? There is law, so they're supposed to clean up. The federal law says you make a mess, you got to clean it up. And the military and the Department of Energy are like the biggest contaminators in the United States. And Vieques is a gigantic Superfund site. And the Navy, the federal government has spent now well over $200 million on cleanup in Vieques. My guess is that the greatest amount of that money has ended up in the bank accounts of large U.S. multinational corporations that control that process. Right. One is called CHM2 Hill, and then they subcontract out others. There's some people in Vieques working on the project, a few dozen people, and that's good, that's important. The process is not happening as we would have liked to see it, to be a real contribution and a kickstart maybe to the Vieques economy, and then to have transfer of technology to Puerto Rican and maybe Vieques companies to really control the processes. That's not happening at all. And even within the companies that are working in Vieques, they have their own little speculation projects going on with land and properties. The ferry system is, it's a disaster. This is a service. I mean, the ferry system that connects Vieques and Culebra to the main island of Puerto Rico is a necessary service, a vital, necessary service that the government of Puerto Rico has to provide to these two island communities. It's our roads, it's a highway system, but in water, and they have to provide these systems. And, for years and years, people complained about the ferry because they were a little slow, and I remember my, first years in Vieques, 30 years ago. You'd go in the ferry, you're going to get to Fajardo, you're going to be wet. That is if you want to go outside. You don't like being in the stuffy inside of the boat, and you go outside, you're going to get wet. So you're going to end up being, you get to Fajardo and your hair is salty. That's kind of what happened here. And they were a little slow, and they weren't so comfortable, but they kind of ran on time most of the time. This past year has been the worst year. And I think everybody in Vieques says the same thing. Nobody can remember a time when things have been so bad. And this coincides with a push for privatization that's been mounting in Puerto Rico, as in the United States, as in many other places, right? As the Chilean junta did, in '73, as a result of our wonderful U.S. policy to help develop Chile while killing their people. But that's the size of it. But it's this idea of privatization, neoliberal stuff. The demise of the failure, the collapse of the ferry system, and coincides with this current administration that is calling for these private government and private, projects, teamed up projects, and privatization. So some suggest that the government is purposely letting it run down so that people will scream for privatization. Others suggest it's just simply pure mediocridad. Just the inefficiency, mediocrity, the incapacity, the lack of interest on the part of the government to deal with the ferry system. They just let it run down. And that there happens to be a really serious economic crisis as well that affects everybody, including the ferry system. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know, but it's probably a combination of those things. The section on the eastern end, that's the area that's a wilderness zone that nobody can ever go into. But all of the rest of the land that is not so severely contaminated that could be used for social and economic development is still controlled by the federal government as a wildlife refuge.
And as far as cleanup, the federal government has not done that.
They've spent $200 million so far. They've blown up hundreds of tons of bombs. They've taken out hundreds of tons of junk. They sell the scrap metal. They bring it out. They send it out in barges. They sell it somewhere. We're not sure where. So they have been cleaning up. I mean, it's not that they're not cleaning up. They're doing it. many of us in Vieques have serious concerns about the way it's happening, some of the strategies like the open detonations that have been there's been a constant process, and that puts more contaminants into the air, and we believe there should be more community participation at all levels in the process.
Okay. So.
Don, forgive me if you already addressed this because I came in late, but I'm interested in the status of the legal case that's pending before the First Circuit now. I don't know if you spoke about the...
I didn't speak about this, but I'll just say quickly, this is somewhere around 2001 or 2. John Arthur Eves, a lawyer from, not Alabama, where's John from? Tennessee, Mississippi. What's your name?
Natasha.
Do you work with John? Oh, Natasha, ¿cómo te estás? Bendita, ahora te estoy mirando. Qué chévere. But John Arthur Eves, really sweetheart of a guy from Mississippi, came to Vieques, I think at the bequest of... So John Arthur Eves, this lawyer from Mississippi, came into Vieques and worked at the behest of Rabin, ex-mayor of Vieques, who was also the sub-commissioner for Vieques, and started this court case, a class action case where 7,000 Viequenses now registered in this case. It's been going on now for 10 years. He tried to get a settlement done, tried to get the government to settle out of court, a lot of pressure, and this guy has spent a lot of money. I mean, I know he's spent over $1 million on this case, and I have a feeling now that he is just so really keyed into Vieques that he really wants to see something happen. I think he kind of knows that there's not going to be any real big settlement. So he's been helping and working and pushing people like Rothman, for instance, to try to get something done, at least to help on some level the question of medical services. But the case right now is on appeal in the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals in Boston. And I'm not sure what the status is right now, what the calendar is right now. We spoke with people from John's office yesterday. Melissa called because this tied into that case is the issue of ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, part of the CDC. And the ATSDR put out a study around 2001 saying there's no relationship between Navy toxics and contamination and the high cancer case and other issues, health issues in Vieques. Puerto Rican scientists and others challenged that and were able to get the director of ATSDR, this guy Howard Frumpkin, a few years ago to say, okay, well, actually, the Congress of the United States, I think it was Rothman and others, basically said to this ATSDR agency, you need to take a fresh look at Vieques because how can you say, since they did such a bad job on it, they botched up other issues of community contamination issues, that you need to take a fresh look at Vieques. Frumpkin came to Vieques. Frumpkin was the director of ATSDR, came to Vieques, community meeting. People talked to him, and let out their feelings about what was happening. And then a team of Puerto Rican scientists went to Atlanta, met with Frumpkin and his team, and basically, convinced him that, yeah, we really need to take another look at this. Oh, I mean, he was convinced because he was ordered to do so by the Congress. But President Obama, this is after this guy Frumpkin, the head of ATSDR, makes a commitment to the people of Vieques that they will take a fresh look at the Vieques, issues and the findings, original findings that said there was no relationship. And he was working on this. Obama threw him out. And the new guy he put in place hasn't said jack shit about Vieques. But right now, we're waiting any minute now, any day now, in this now month of December, ATSDR is going to come out with their second finding, their revision, their review, and many suggest that what they're going to say is, no, we still don't find any real hard relationship between Navy contamination and health. And this is a key issue for that court case, because if ATSDR, the federal government comes out and says there is a causal relationship between Navy activity and health problems on Vieques, it's a very really good thing for this court case. So it's probably not going to happen. Probably not going to happen.